Welcome back, or welcome to Endurance Icons, where we sit down with individuals excelling and inspiring in the wide world of endurance sports. We are your hosts, Mark and Jessica Cullen, and our guests today, we are super excited to have pro triathlete Haley Chura on the show today. Haley started out as a collegiate swimmer at UGA and then moved her way to triathlon and has had a great career with multiple wins and podiums, and is just coming off a great 2022 where she had 2 victories at Ironman Mont Tremblant and Challenge Porto-Veras, and finished off with her best performance at an Ironman World Championship where she finished 13th overall. She's also the co-host of the Iron Women podcast. Definitely recommend checking that out if you get a chance. And she's also a run and tri coach at Dynamo Multisport as well. So we're super pumped to welcome Haley today. Welcome, Haley. How's it going?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm very impressed with my bio. I know that most of the information I have put on the internet is like very out of date. So I'm thankful that you that was a very up-to-date bio. So good work.
Of course, we do our research. Gotta make sure our guests get the full experience here.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
So where are you coming to us from today? Where's kind of your base training ground?
I'm in Bozeman, Montana right now, and it is, I mean, it's probably, it's pretty cold. I think it's probably around like 0 degrees Celsius, like right around 32 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe a little below that, and snowing, like big snowflakes right now. It's actually really, really pretty. But I'm thankful I did my long run yesterday because it can kind of be nice to run in this, but I run a lot on trails. And so you're like slogging through, once it gets more than like ankle deep snow, I'm just like, oh, this is excessively hard. So beautiful and great when you're doing a lot of indoor training.
The trails, do you have a lot of those around you? And is it sort of strategic of why you choose to run mostly on trails?
Yes. So I do. That's why I live where I live, like this exact condo. I was very, very fortunate to live here because I can basically, like, I'm 200 meters from a trailhead, and I do that a lot just to get off the road. So I was hit by a car in 2015 and had just a hard time getting back on roads, like both cycling and running. I was hit while cycling, but psychologically it just took me a really long time to recover from that. And I don't know if I'll ever quite be the same. I mean, it changed how I drive. It's changed how just I walk, a lot of that. And so it's just nice to be able to run in a way that, you aren't around too many cars. And it's honestly just good training. I think it helps my brain in that I'm like kind of having to pay attention to foot strikes. I think it's helped me build up a lot of strength. And where I live, there are a lot of packed gravel trails. So we're not talking real trail runner trails. I mean, you can get that here in Bozeman. Like, I have some friends who are true trail runners and they're doing insane things that I could barely hike. And it's not like that. Like, these are very mellow, rolling, undulating, like the chance of like twisting an ankle is like equal to if I was running on a flat road. So I'm not technically a trail runner, but I am more like flat, like calm trail off-road runner. I don't know what I just made that up, but I'll go with that.
A flat trail off-road runner. You should trademark that. We'll attribute it to you.
It rolls off the tongue just so easily.
2015 must have been the year for going hit by a car. I went through a car windshield that year as well.
I'm
so
so
I totally
sorry.
No, it's I understand the psychological piece of trying to return back to this sport and sort of I would say the unlearning you need to do because it is a trauma. So what did you do to reintroduce the sport back after you experienced such a traumatic thing?
I went to therapy, which honestly, I worked with a psychologist, which was probably the best thing I did. And just talking to someone about it a lot helped in a ton. And I do remember the day in therapy when I was like, okay, I'm not afraid to ride my bike on the road. And that was, I didn't just like go hop on the bike after that, but I think it just took probably like a year, from that moment. But it was just kind of talking through things and realizing that I really liked the adventure of riding and traveling somewhere under my own power. And I, felt it was worth the risk, and just kind of really saying that out loud was really powerful. And I'm really thankful that I was really patient. My coach was really patient. Pretty much everyone in my life was really patient with me, and no one was like, you need to get back out there. It was just like, take your time. And even for years later, I mean, I think it was like 2 years after the crash, because the crash happened, it was like 3 weeks before Kona. And, I was incredibly fit, everything. And it wasn't life threatening, but it was career threatening. And so, miraculously in 2017, I had actually qualified for Kona again, and I'd had an incredible year. And I remember it was like 3 weeks before that, I had my last long ride, and I didn't want to go outside. And so I had a friend who actually came over, and I rode 6 hours on the trainer, and she brought like a dozen donuts and rode 4 hours. And it was beautiful. Like, it was a beautiful, perfect day outside, but she's just like, I get it. You don't have to. And so I think it was that patience. And now again, I do ride outside quite a bit when it isn't cold, but it has taken some time, and I'm pretty strategic in my routes and strategic at what time of day I'm riding. And I put a lot of lights on my bike. I wear a lot of bright colors, and I don't know if all those things help, but I feel like they can't hurt. And so it's been a process, and it probably will go on for the rest of my life. But a big other change was just how I drive. Like, I put so much more responsibility on me as a driver when I'm behind the wheel of a car, and realize how much damage I can do, and that it's not worth a rush. Like, it's okay to be late. It's okay to, sit at a stop sign or something. I don't know, just take that extra beat, because I have so much power when I'm behind the wheel of a car, and I don't ever want to do, put someone in that position where they're so hurt.
No, that makes total sense. I think there will never be a left-hand turn I will ever make on my bike without thinking, please don't hit me. Please don't hit me. But it does, it slowly eases up. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how you arrived into this sport. So I know that you haven't always been a triathlete. So I know that you started your career you were a swimmer. Because I think I read somewhere your mother said that it was a safe sport. And based on what we were just talking about, she was right. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how did your sport journey start?
Yeah. So my parents are pretty active, and it took me into, becoming an adult to realize that I was really lucky. And I grew up thinking, of course, adults just exercise. And that isn't the case for a lot of people. And they're trying to learn to like exercise as adults. So I'm thankful for that. But my mom was actually a professional downhill skier. And so I have some good genetics. I definitely have some good genetics. And I did ski a little bit. I grew up here in Bozeman, actually. And so I skied a lot as a kid, but my sister and I weren't really allowed to race skiing because my mom had so many injuries when she was skiing. I'm sure anyone who follows downhill skiing, it's scary. And so she had so many injuries, and she just didn't want us racing. So we skied a lot recreationally. And I think I even have some pictures where I was allowed to go to picture day with the ski team, but not actually race. But then I did race in the pool, but we did race. I mean, I didn't feel left out or anything like that. I was fine. I got my adrenaline rush and my, like, everything from diving off the swim blocks and being a part of the swim team. And so I wasn't necessarily like a phenom as a young child swimming. I was probably one of the slowest people on the team, but I enjoyed it. Like, I think that I enjoyed kind of having that friend group. My family actually moved around quite a bit when I was, in middle school, high school. And so it kind of gave me that connection to a new school, to a new community immediately. And then I did when I was a kid. Like, I was lucky here in Bozeman that at the time when I was like, 8, 9, a lot of the older high school kids were going to swim in college. And I think that, and sometimes they would come back, and I think I was like that nosy little 8-year-old who was like kind of eavesdropping in the shower. And I was just like, this sounds so cool. Like, it was just one of those really cool things. And I just really admired, especially some of those girls that were going to go swim in college. And I was like, I want to do that. And so that was like a goal of mine from a pretty young age, that I really wanted to swim in college. And I really am thankful that I just, through, those formative years, I always had some older people that some of the older college kids that would come back. And I think that's a good reminder that I wasn't like I was talking to them because I was like, but I was just like, I paid attention and I was watching, and it just seemed so cool. They were coming back wearing their sweatshirts from their, their team. And it was just one of those formative things. And that was always my goal. And thankfully I did get fast enough. Probably, toward my later years in high school, I got fast enough that I could think about swimming in college. And then I got fast enough that I was like, okay, I could probably swim at, a lot of different colleges. And I really, really wanted to be on a team that was going to win a national championship. And so I graduated from high school in South Carolina, and University of Georgia is kind of right there. I wasn't like heavily recruited by Georgia. It was more like I had to reach out to them and be like, please let me on. And I actually had mostly academic scholarships. And so I was just like, how can I make this work? And I wanted to be, the little fish in a big pond and learn. And that was exactly what I got. I mean, it was incredible. And I learned so much. And I feel like I rose to the occasion. I mean, it was intense and so hard, but also just probably exactly what I needed when I was like 18 to 22 years old. And we did win a national championship in 2005. And it was just as great as I could have imagined, even better, probably.
So you talked about not being a phenom when you were younger, and then to national championship. What do you attribute that moment of getting faster? What were some of the things that you did to really unlock that speed in the pool?
I think it was probably puberty mostly. Honestly, I think that was it. I think I was just like a little bit of a late bloomer, and it just took some time. And so I think, having an initial love for the sport that kept me going when I wasn't winning, probably helped then when I did get faster. And so I think that was sort of, having that base. And then I was lucky, I think, especially my senior year of high school, again, when I had moved to South Carolina, just like, my last 2 years of high school. And so, which was probably really hard and could have gone very poorly, but there was this guy, Tristan, who I had one really good training partner, and we just had so much fun. Like we trained so hard, like so much harder, than a lot of the other people. Like we'd go in on Sundays and swim, and but it was really fun. And I think that was a good lesson, that you don't necessarily need a whole bunch of people, but if you have one person, like sometimes that, that makes the hard work fun. It keeps you in it and it keeps you going. And then at Georgia, I had, 30 people I could train with. And that also, I know that my college experience probably wasn't like a lot of other people's. I did go to school, and I did take school very hard, very seriously, but I probably majored in swimming, unofficially, just because swimming was my top priority, and it kind of had to be on a team like Georgia. And I didn't, we would get up really early. We'd swim at like 5:30 in the morning, and then go to class, and then, hopefully sneak in a nap, and then head back to the pool at 2-3 in the afternoon. And then we all went to the dining hall at 5 p.m. and 8. And I never thought that was weird. I think that is pretty unusual for like a college kid schedule, especially it was like, oh, it's great, the dining hall's empty. But you have like a whole group of swimmers. So it's like, you don't feel like it's weird when you're like in it. And I think that was really cool. Like I never felt like I was missing out. I never felt like the grass was greener in a different situation. I think I was just pretty lucky that I was like in this moment. I'm like, you are so lucky. Embrace it and, just enjoy it, even though it is really hard. And I don't think I always had like the perspective that this won't last forever. I think when it did end, when I graduated, it was pretty harsh. But then I found triathlon. So I was like, oh, wow, I can keep going.
And I know that immediately following school, you didn't just jump into professional triathlon, you were an accountant. And I think I read a story where it was actually your boss who challenged you to run a marathon. So I think it's so neat how you had that level of support, but I'd love to know with accounting, is there anything that you brought from your accounting career that informs your triathlon? Any skills or way of thinking that you still have today?
Oh, I'd love to say my taxes, but I wasn't a tax accountant. I was an auditor. So I think I mean, yes, definitely. I think, I was pretty like, as an auditor, you are uh, disliked by a lot of people. So I think I brought my thick skin a little bit.
I was like, where is she going with this?
Because, well, it is. I mean, no one
Yeah.
wants to be audited. I understand that. And so the nice thing about that though, too, is the bar is very low. So it's like, if you go in and you're like, hi, I'm Haley, they're like, oh, wow, she's so much nicer than we expected. And so the bar is like very, very low, but I think there's like some organization skills that I probably took. And, from a sponsorship standpoint, it's hard. Like, as a triathlete, like, you are just getting rejected like a lot or ghosted. And at first it really shocked me because I'm like, wait, this is this person's job. They can just ghost. Like, I used to get in trouble if I didn't respond to an email within 6 hours. And I'm like, oh, I miss accounting and auditing. But then I think it's just been like, okay, I learned a certain level of tenacity, a certain level of just asking for things, and being uncomfortable and making mistakes and understanding that I don't know everything, but I can do some good research. And I think that those are skills that I'm definitely grateful for. I think also with auditing, you travel around a lot, not with quite as much luggage as I do now, but you're in different environments. Like, I'd be going to a bunch of different companies and having to work in a different environment. And that is also triathlon. I think that's one reason I have done well at races that aren't necessarily perfect. They have a little bit of a Wild West feel where it's like, oh no, all the bags blew down. And it's like, this is fine. I can figure it out. And so I think that there's some of that where I can be in a different location and problem solve that maybe came a bit from auditing, a bit from my childhood. And maybe some of it is just like ingrained, but I do think that's a major strength of mine in the sport.
Incredible. And it wasn't all difficult and headwinds going pro. When I look at your first year, I've heard from other pros that often you almost need to do this earning of your stripes. And from an outside perspective, it looks like there was almost no earning of stripes. You just jumped in and started, crushing these races almost immediately in 2012. I'd love to know a little bit about what that transition looked like for you, and maybe some of your biggest learnings in the first year of being pro.
Yeah. I mean, I look back and I'm like, whoa, that is insane. I won my third pro race ever, which was very wild. And I don't think that kind of thing really happens much anymore. I do think, I spent 4 years as an age grouper and I was on the Kona podium twice. So I was doing pretty well. And I do think one of the things I was actually doing during that time was saving money to go pro. And so that is one other skill from accounting I had. I had taken for 4 years, I'd taken money out of every single paycheck and put it into a savings account that I tried not to touch. And for hopefully the day I went pro, and I wanted more than was in there than when I did quit my job. So I did my first 2 pro races while still working and did okay. I raced Ironman Arizona. I got 7th. And then I think I I left my job on like a Thursday. And then that Saturday or Sunday, I raced in Galveston 70.3. That was probably, I wouldn't recommend doing that because I was like at happy hour on like 3 days before the race, like crying because I'm like so sad. I was very sad to leave my job because I did have really supportive colleagues and I really enjoyed making money. And so and having that financial stability, and I was very afraid, but I was just at a crossroads in where my career was going really well, but it was going to take a little bit more out of me. The travel, especially, I was struggling with because I was a member of like 4 different gyms and I'm just like, this is ridiculous, and it was just really hard. I once ran a 40-mile race with my boss, which I'm like, we could go into like this kind of stuff probably wouldn't happen now from an HR perspective, but I ran a 40-mile trail run and then got on a flight and flew to Tampa to like go to work. And I was like, what? Like, this is like nuts. And, he got to go home. It's like nice to be the boss. But anyway, it's just like, it was just getting to be a little bit much. And I realized that there was a timeline on triathlon because I was racing really well. And I think, especially, I never won my age group in Kona, but I got 2nd and then I got 3rd, and I'd gotten 3rd at the 70.3 worlds in my age group. And I was in 25, 29 age group. So pretty competitive, around that age. And my coach and I talked and he's kind of like, I feel like it's now or never. Like, either you enjoy being a top age grouper, or like, let's go race this people who are your same age that are, the fastest. And so that was kind of the goal. And again, I wanted to keep going and working for like a whole year, but just I wasn't doing a bad job at both basically. And I was like, okay, one has more of a timeline. So I decided to leave accounting, and it was very hard to do that. And then did those 2 races. And so I think it was 2 weeks after Galveston, I raced in New Orleans and won. And that was bizarre. I mean, I had not had a job for 2 weeks, which had been like the most bizarre 2 weeks of my life. Like I'd felt so weird to have like that free time, because I was still like getting up at, 5 a.m. to work out, just because that was my schedule. And so I was still kind of training like an age grouper. And, but I managed to win that race. And I mean, it was just so surreal. Like the whole time I was just like, wait, like, is this happening? And I do remember running across that finish line in Louis Armstrong Park. And I was just like crying. And I had so many doubts on leaving my job. And I was like, well, maybe this was the right decision. Like I just won a pro race, and it was such an incredible experience. And in that moment I was like, okay, I think this was worth it. Like, even if it all ends, right now, and I go back to work next week, I think it was worth taking 2 weeks off at least. And then I did, I talked to my coach a lot, and it's like, okay, what can I do now that I don't have this normal 9 to 5 and the travel? And part of it was like, okay, now I can go to races like Ironman Brazil and go travel to some of these races because I'm not counting my vacation days. And I can kind of afford to be away from home a little bit longer. And that was, again, really incredible. And not even from the racing perspective, but from like the people I got to meet. And I do remember like sitting at a dinner once with, Sarah Gross and Hillary Biscay and Blake Becker, just these other pros. And I just felt like it was so cool. And I was like, okay, this moment is worth it. Like, yes, I might be back in accounting when I'm 80 years old, but I need to like sear this moment in my memory, because it will be worth it. It will be worth being an 80-year-old accountant who never retires. So I hope I still feel that way when I'm 80. I'm like trying to like audit someone, but it's been a journey for sure. But I do think the other thing about going pro when you are a good swimmer, I think that like I was a little bit more prepared for racing kind of solo. I think, watching other people go pro and other, it's a big difference. Usually like racing pro, you're alone a lot. And I think I had been a pretty good swimmer, or I had been even a better swimmer as an age grouper. And so that made the transition a little bit easier, because I was used to being in the front of the race. It wasn't too new for me.
Nice. So if you had a few recommendations for like females or males that are trying to make that step to pro, like it's changed a lot in the last couple of years. Like the caliber is so high these days and so competitive. You see how many people are at like the top and competing week in, week out for races. What would be some of your biggest recommendations of pieces they could put in place to allow themselves to be successful? You did that kind of savings account, but I'm sure there's some other tactics you might have for them to help make it a career.
Yeah, having the financial cushion, I think, definitely helps. I do think even now, like having financial stability. I remember when I first went pro, someone was like, oh, you'll race so much better when you're thinking like, if I don't win, I don't eat. And honestly, that was the worst advice, because I'm like, wait, I have an accounting degree. I can go get a job in a second and eat just fine. Like that's too much stress. Like that was way too much stress. Like I don't want to be like, if I don't win this race, I don't eat, because what if you get a flat tire, then you don't eat? I mean, for me, that didn't work. But I think the advice, having a financial, some kind of financial cushion is helpful. I do think things have changed a little bit, but I think the idea of qualifying to go pro is an excellent goal. I think if you are in the 20 to 40 something range. I mean, DD Griesbauer is 52, so maybe to 50 range. I do think, it's pretty cool to race against the fastest people. And I do think that you don't have to stay pro. You can qualify and not take your pro license. I think you can qualify and, probably get a pro license for one race in December and test it out, see if you like it, you hate it, go back to age group. I think that like being flexible like that, just knowing that it isn't a marriage. You don't have to do it forever, but you can test it out and maybe you'll like it. I think there are some benefits to it. Just like starting in the front of the race is very nice. sometimes you get into some races a little bit later, but it is hard. It's very stressful. The stress is very different. And, I think that there aren't like a ton of perks, but some of the races, like the clash races, they treat you really well, but I think they treat the age groupers pretty well too. So I don't know if I can count that as a perk, but I think it's worth trying. That would be my advice, is it's worth trying it. And I don't think there's any stigma on going back to age group, but I just think knowing that you raced the best people that were around your same age is a cool thing to have said you tried.
Totally. Great advice. Hopping into some of your 2022 races here, I'd love to chat through kind of how the year went for you. A couple wins in there, your best finish in Kona ever. Maybe give us a kind of spin through the year, some ups and downs that you had in 2022.
Yeah, 2022 was a very surprising year because I think if I take a step back, like I talked about 2017, which until now I probably would have considered my best year, but I think 2022 might have actually been my best year. And it was a little unexpected. I struggled through the pandemic. I know everyone did, but there was a lot of like, should I still be doing this? Should I go back to accounting or something else? What is happening with the world? I think that was a general feeling probably for a lot of us. And so I went through 2021, with a lot of doubts, and even started 2022. And one thing I think I've done okay with is kind of trying to find races that didn't sign up for races that, just sound fun to me. I think kind of that's what I encourage age groupers to do too. Like you have to really want to be there. You have to, because all these races are so hard. And so I think that when Challenge Puerto Varas, I think I got like a Instagram DM and from a woman who is at Quintana Roo is my bike sponsor. And she's like a Quintana Roo. She and her, her business partner have a Quintana Roo store in Chile, and they were like, hey, come down to this race. And honestly, at the point, I didn't even know if it was a pro race, but I was like, someone wants me there. Like, this might be silly. I just spend a lot of money to go down to Chile, but I was like, oh, what else am I doing with my life? And so I was like, sure. And also I was like, is this a scam? Like, but it ended up not being a scam. And actually it was incredible. Like, it was just so beautiful there. And Puerto Varas reminds me a lot of Bozeman in the summer. And that's something that I think some of my best races have come when I went to the Southern Hemisphere during the Northern Hemisphere winter. And it's like, oh, there's light at the end of the tunnel, these long days. And, it's actually kind of cold. And so, which also suits me, but it's like September cold. So it's not that cold, but not terribly hot. And I raced pretty well. And again, first year race, they had some kinks to iron out, but I think that I work really well with that kind of thing. Cause again, I'm sort of pretty good at problem solving in the moment, and I just loved it. I just had such a fun time. And I do remember running down the finish line in Puerto Varas, and I knew I was going to win, and I just couldn't believe it because I thought my days of winning races were over. I'd had several years of pretty, just not good racing and pandemic. And I was just like, I never thought I would have that feeling again. And so I really soaked it up. I was like, and I think we got to run across the line with all these like children and with balloons. And I was like, okay, enjoy this, because you never thought this would happen ever again. And it was just a really cool experience. And sometimes when you do some of these like, out of the country races, like you get to meet a lot of people because you're kind of drawn toward people who speak English. And a lot of times people are staying in the same hotel. And you might eat together, or you might just see each other more frequently versus in the US, everyone's kind of in their own rental cars, like, just doing everything on their own. And so that was also really fun to kind of connect with some other pros and chat with people. And then last year was a little different with St. George being the world championship in May, and my training was so good. And I really, really, really expected that race to go incredibly well. And my swim went great, but I led the swim, which again, I don't take that for granted. I had done that in 2013, my first year as a pro. And it's so weird to have done that in 2013 and 2022 because swimming is something usually you do pretty well at when you're younger. And I'm really proud of how I've held on to my swim actually. And so I was like, hey, this is amazing. But I didn't know it at the time, but I had a mechanical during the bike that just wore me out. And so my, my wheel had warped. And so it was rubbing against the frame. I couldn't tell. I mean, again, there's a lot of noise, especially when you're leading, you have like motorcycles, all this. So I couldn't actually tell, except that I was like putting out pretty high numbers in the beginning and everyone was like zooming by me. Like I was standing still and I was just like, wow, I guess everyone's so much better. And then I like toward the end, I was like, I can't make it through 112 miles. Like I just felt like I didn't have it in me to do 112 miles. And I finished that race, but it was very demoralizing. And it took, a couple days. And then I was like, I finally like went to get on the bike and I was like, wait, something is wrong with this. And I was like, oh my goodness, it was probably like this during the race, but you always have that doubt that you're like, is it the bike or was it just me? Am I just not able to do 112 miles on the bike anymore? And so I did have a lot of doubt and I was pretty down through like the beginning of the summer and just, I had no races on my schedule and I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I got COVID, unfortunately, and that gave me a little downtime, I guess. And one of my good friends called me and she was just like, you should sign up for Ironman Mont Tremblant. And I was like, I'm like sick at home and I'm like, okay, whatever, and I signed up with her, but she's like, let's just book the flights. There's no change fees this day and age now. And I'm like, yes, no problem. Let me just like spend $800. No big deal. And so we did like literally like, as I'm like sick at home, like booking flights and to an Ironman. And so it was kind of ridiculous, but I did book flights, hotel, everything, knowing I could cancel. And that was like my thought process was I was like, okay, I'm going to cancel. And then the other one was like Alicia Kay at Clash was like, come do Watkins Glen. And I mean, I guess I listen a lot when people just like randomly tell me to do races, but I had never been to that part of the country. Like I'd never really been to like the Northeast part of the United States. And so, or like that part of New York, especially. And everyone says such good things. And again, I like to use triathlon as a way to travel. And so I was like, okay, sure. And so it was like my travel itinerary was like ridiculous, like all this, but I was like, I want to see Niagara Falls, which is not close to Watkins Glen. But it was cheaper to fly to Buffalo. And I was like, I can go see that. And like, just get to be a part of this, like see what it's like to run on the racetrack. And I wasn't feeling super well because I think I'd only been like 2 or 3 weeks post-COVID, which was also like, oh gosh, but I ran well and on the track and I had so much fun. And it was just like a totally different triathlon experience. And I think that reinvigorated me. And then I had like 6 weeks to Mont Tremblant. And so I was like, okay, let's do this thing. Like, and I got right back on, out there and was like training for Ironman right after I got home and it felt terrible. And I was like, what am I doing? But each week got a little bit better, to the point where I was like, okay, I think I can try 112 miles. And I still had that fear from St. George that I was just going to go and like blow up again. And I was like, I think Betty came up to that race, my friend who convinced me to go. And she was like, I'm like, okay, like, it's okay to DNF, right? Cause I'm like, I can't do that again. I know that like, triathlon has a lot of death before DNF like mentality, but I honestly feel like death is not worth it. Like it's not that bad to DNF. And so, so I was just going into that with like not very high hopes, but I had raced in Tremblant in 2013. I really enjoyed that. And I was like, okay, I'll go back. And honestly, it was even better. Like it had gotten even nicer. Like I splurged and I stayed in the ski village this time, which was like made everything so convenient. And I was like, oh my goodness, it was just, there's a pool there now. And I was like, wow, I don't know. It just felt, I remember when I did it in 2013, it felt like Ironman Disneyland. I was like, did they train these volunteers to smile? Like, I'm like, this is bizarre. And then it had somehow even gotten better by 2022. So I went into that race kind of uncertain, but I had also watched Lindsay Corbin, who's a friend, competitor of mine, have a tough race in St. George as well. And Lindsay is a pretty consistent athlete. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh man. And then she went to Des Moines after that and got a Kona slot and did well. And that really made me feel like, okay, if Lindsay can come back from that, why can't I? Lindsay hasn't been defined by her one bad race. I don't need to be defined by that. And so, I went to Tremblant, had a great time, and then I felt awesome all day long. Like it was just like one of those, I mean, not all day. I mean, it's Ironman, but like for the most
Fair.
part, more than 50%. And I mean, I came out of the swim like only, I think 40 seconds behind Rachel Zelinskis, who also swam at the University of Georgia, but 10 years after me. And she was like a distance swimmer and I was a 200 backstroker. So like her best times are like way faster than mine. So I was like, oh me, because to be that close to her is really good. And then on the bike, I just was like, okay, this is fun. And it was raining, which, you know, I like things cooled off a little bit. And it was just, the bike course was even better than I remembered it in 2013. And I kind of was always waiting for like the other shoe to drop and like me to just like start getting passed. And I was like, no one's passing me. I'm like, this is bizarre. I'm just going to like live it up. And I just felt pretty solid. And I think it was all the training I had done before St. George that I had been doing for, 9 months was like paying off on that day. And then I got to the run and, I was like, woohoo, I'm leading, but I'm like terrified of the marathon. And so just kind of trying, I think I ate 6 gels in the first 12 miles, which is so much. Like that is because I just like, I have a definite fear of bonking because I'm just like, it's happened. I've done enough of these that I'm like, I know what it feels like. And I know it's 100% my fault. So I ate so much. And I got to the halfway point and I wasn't feeling like, I was like down and I was like, oh no, I was like out of it. And I remember seeing Lindsay had dropped out of the race because I think she was injured. And so she was cheering for me. And I know afterwards she's like, yeah, you looked bad. And I was like, I felt bad, but I was like, okay, I can do this. I can run 13 miles or 21 kilometers. And then this huge storm came in. And that was just the best thing that probably could have happened to me. I know that for the age groupers who were still on the bike, it was terrifying. But for me, I was, this huge storm and it like cooled me off. And I just it kind of woke me up. I was like in a funk, kind of starting to feel a little bit sorry for myself, which who does that while leading an Ironman? I don't know. Probably everyone, to be honest. Like no one's having like that good of a time. It's really hard. So I was like, it was one of those things where I was like, okay. And I just like stopped eating an excessive number of gels. I went to like Coke and Red Bull because I don't drink Red Bull normally, but it's like the elixir of God while during an Ironman.
Amen.
And I was just like, okay, you've got this. Like, how much do you want it? Do you want this win? And I think it was like, I was just like, remember having that kind of internal conversation with myself where I'm like, you can lay on the ground and cry and have a pity party right now if you want, or you can just like suck it up for, an hour and a half or a little bit more, I think. And just really get the most out of yourself in that moment. And so I'm thankful for that storm and how it did kind of wake me up. I will admit though, that when that storm, it was a big storm. Like there was like lightning, thunder, like leaves everywhere. And I was like, they cancel the race. Do I still win? Because I was like, what's going to happen? Because I was leading and I'm like, that thought did cross my mind, which I shouldn't admit, but it does. But I did end up winning. And I was really emotional. I've won 2 Ironmans. The first was in Fortaleza, Brazil in 2014. And I cried like crazy coming across that line because I had a tough year that year too. And it was another day where I just raced my training and it came together. And I know the photographers afterwards were like, don't cry when you go across the line. It looks so bad. I'm like, it's how I feel. And actually, I love that picture of myself crying, coming across the line. And the same thing kind of happened in Tremblant. Like, again, I'm like, don't cry. I'm just like, oh, because those moments, again, they don't happen that often. And I'm old enough now that I'm like, okay, this probably could be my last, like soak it up. Like, and I did running through that ski village. It's a very cool finish line. I'm sure sounds like y'all have done it, but you're like running through that ski village, but it's like downhill with the cobblestones. I'm like, don't trip. But it's like, people are cheering. And like, I'm like, okay, just make it down there. And then it's like fireworks. And I was like, whoa. And I think, I've done a few races with Mike Riley and I didn't really appreciate him until that one, which I'm glad I got that one in because, I was actually like with it enough to like hear him, and just appreciate the energy. And again, I'm really thankful for that. I'm thankful I got that experience because I thought it never would happen. So yes, there were some major ups in 2023, 2022. And I'm grateful for that year because I think that it's hard. It's hard to put together a year like that, especially when you're, 37.
Man, sounds so epic. Yeah, it's such a good race. Tremblant, that finish line is like tough to compare to most places. That's so cool. Finishing off 2022, so you did an Ironman there in Tremblant, and then had to turn it around a couple weeks later to go. I think you
I forgot about that
one.
one. Yeah. Well, Tremblant is perfect. Like I said, even I was warm in Tremblant, which it's not hot there.
Yeah.
And that storm came in. I was like, oh, thank goodness. I'm like so hot. And then I'm like, when they did the Kona slots, I told my good friend Betty and my mom and my coach, I think after that race, and I was like, I truly don't need to go to Kona. Like, I really don't. And even Matthew was like, my coach, he was like, don't do it for me. And I was like, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Betty. So she knows that, because my friend Betty, Janelle, like, she loves Kona. She and her husband, they just love Kona. And they like to go and they cheer. And so I didn't feel like I needed that. Like, again, in 2017, I think I finished 17th, 18th there. I should know. I think it was 18th. And I had a great day. It wasn't a perfect day, but it was a great Kona experience. And I just didn't necessarily feel like I needed to go back. I didn't feel like I had unfinished business there. And I was really nervous about the heat, because in 2017, I remember being really, really hot, and I live in Montana, and I'm just like, I don't know if I'm built for this, or if I need to. I don't need to prove anything. And so, but again, Betty, I can't tell if she's the angel or the devil on my shoulder, but she's like, you got to do it. And so I took the slot, and there were 6 weeks, I think, in between the two races, and very nervous, but I recovered pretty well. I will say that I stayed in a hotel in Montreal, and like, they had a pool, and I was like sitting there passive aggressively while these children were playing until their parents were like, get out. And then I like got in and swam some laps, which I think helped with my recovery. But it's like, I did get on that recovery really quick, like fluids, good food, shakeout swims, like and I didn't try to like replicate necessarily my build that I had just done, like knowing I had some good, fitness coming off of Tremblant. And as an age grouper, I had done I'd done Louisville, Hawaii, which is very similar turnaround, and done better in Hawaii. And so I was like, well, maybe there's a chance. And I did actually go to Tucson, Arizona, and stayed with a couple good friends there, I was really lucky, because the weather was perfect and beautiful, and like, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which I don't know what that is in Celsius, but it's really nice, like 21 or something, Celsius. And so it was really nice and really sad to leave Bozeman when it's that nice and go to Tucson where it's like so hot, and like purposefully be out there. But I was like, okay, I want to give myself a good shot to like not melt in Hawaii. And I think that did help. I do think that did help. And I also think a healthy fear of Hawaii and the conditions there can actually be helpful, because I don't underestimate it. I know I need to stop at every aid station. I know I need to, work on that. And I think that can play to my advantage sometimes, because I know it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, we had an athlete from our club who was running, and like with 500 meters to go, had to take like a 45-minute sit down at the side of the road.
You see that happen though? I understand.
Wild.
There's a lot of people, they'll talk to me and they'll be like, oh, the models, the algorithms say I can do this. And I'm like, this was like right after Tremblant. And I'm like, if I put my stuff into an algorithm, it's not going to come out and say like, while you're leading this Ironman, you're going to want, like, the thing you want most in life is to lay down on the grass on the side of the road. It's not to slow down. It's not to walk. It is literally to like just curl up in the fetal position and like cry until my dog comes. Like, that's what I wanted. And I'm like, I don't know what model says that. It's hard to like describe to people that's how it happens. And that's how it feels. So I hope, I'm glad, it's impressive he got back up, but it's brutal. It is brutal. And it's true. Like, until you hit the finish line, you're like, I don't know if I'm going to make it.
So Jess, you have your first Kona next year. Are you excited for that?
Well,
did I make it sound fun?
You know what? It sounds like I just need to bring our dog.
No.
I see him on the sidelines, it'll help.
Yeah, no, I mean, Kona's an incredible experience. And I think that I loved it. And that was one of the ways that Betty convinced me to go this past year, was because they had the 2 days. And she's like, and I love unique races. And so I was like, okay, I want to be part of this, like women having their own day. And it was the first time there were 50 pro women. Before that, there had always been fewer pro women than pro men. And that was something that kind of irked me. And so I wanted to be part of that, like to celebrate there being equal numbers of pro women and pro men. And that was like important to me. And that was my 8th time in Kona. You know, I have 4 as an age group, 4 as a pro. And when we made that turn in Javi, and it was just mostly women coming up, it was so cool. It was so cool. Cause in St. George, when the women started like last, I didn't see like a single woman until like the last like 3 miles of, you know, age group women. Like I saw the other pro women, of course, but like the last 3 miles of the marathon, because they started like 2 hours after us. And so it was just like so cool to like turn around and just see this string of women, and then, you know, some men toward the end, but it was just, I had never experienced that at an Ironman before, and especially not in Kona. And people were cheering, you know, back, and it was just like so cool. It was so cool. And then same thing when you're out on the Queen K, because it's hard out there, and it's very like lonely. But the other cool thing was like the helicopter I knew was there for Chelsea. You know, I wasn't trying to go between like Jan and, you know, Daniela kind of thing and go back and forth. But like, I'm like, that helicopter, all that media attention is there for Chelsea. Like, I'm like, that's so cool. Like, I'm so glad I get to witness this as a fan of the sport, and just to like see all these women out here. And I think, you know, it's a little controversial with now that them splitting the races. But I think it's for the best. Like, I'm probably in the minority of thinking this is going to be the most incredible Kona ever, but I think it is, because 2 days was too much for the community there. And I think the community is incredibly gracious to give us 1 day, to allow us to go there. And so I think that is one reason I want to go back to Kona, because again, it's that soul searching and like, do I need to do this? I don't feel like I have unfinished business, but I love being a part of things like this. Like having an all women's Kona day, I think is going to be so incredible. I think, again, all eyes on the women's race, you know, totally fair racing for us pros and for the age group women as well, because you just don't have people who aren't in your race mixing in and making things difficult with drafting and all of that. And the spotlight is on the women. And then, you know, I think it's going to be interesting with it swapping with Nice, France, and just changing things up. Cause I don't think staying the same was an option. And so I think the people who get upset about that, it's like a false choice. You know, you couldn't stay the same. You know, we haven't maintained a good enough relationship with Hawaii to do that. And so, you know, it's on us as triathletes from the past 40 years. Okay, we didn't do it. So this is our consolation prize. Let's see if we can make it work. And also I think it is one of those things, okay, let's try to maintain good relationships with these communities and make sure we recognize that we are visitors, and we're incredibly lucky that they're letting us come in and, you know, run around in neon spandex for a couple days.
So you clearly you love Kona and you love the 1 day women's race. So when it flips, like, and it goes men's and women's, the opposite spots, does like Nice still excite you on those alternate years, or do you just wait till the Kona only years? Or
I'd love to go cheer at Nice. So I think this is a fascinating one, because I understand like maybe if I lived in France or if I lived in Germany, or if I would feel differently, but I raced 70.3 worlds in 2019 in Nice. And I love Nice. Nice is amazing. The swim is wonderful. The run is wonderful. The community is wonderful. Riding up the hill is wonderful. Riding down it, I needed more therapy from that.
It was a scary descent for sure.
Ask.
The guys' day was just all ambulances on that day. It was wild.
Did you race?
Yeah, we both
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. I mean, I tried really hard that year, and maybe like things, you know, life-wise, I probably wasn't as prepared as I should have been, but I tried, you know, I went to Cody, Wyoming, and I did this like fairly technical hill repeats, like trying, because I knew that this was going to be really hard, but I didn't know how hard. I just don't have the bike handling skills. And I think the only way I think I could really compete how I want to compete on that course would be to move to Nice for a while and ride that exact route and ride that descent over and over and over again until I felt comfortable enough to really like race that descent. The problem is, I think part of it was getting hit and being very hurt. I haven't forgotten that. And there's nothing in life. I don't want an Ironman world championship bad enough, you know, to to take the risks I think that you need to be able to take. And I didn't grow up riding on roads like that. And so I think you can train for it. I don't know where in North America you go. But I think if you have the money, you go to Nice and you go ride that actual route. And then I think it'd be incredibly fun. But I was just like, I think my hands were cramping from braking.
Yeah.
I just don't have it in me.
Or my
I don't
brake
have
pads out for sure.
But I think it's going to be great. And I think it does end up showcasing athletes with different skills. And I think that is kind of neat. Because I think that, you know, a lot of the Europeans are really, really good descenders. And so, and even some North Americans, I mean, I've seen some of my competitors and they can descend like, you know, I'm just like, wow, you know, people climb mountains and I'm like, wow, how do you do that? You know, I just don't quite have it, but you know, I can do some one arm freestyle better than most. So we all have our skills.
That's your favorite drill, Jess, one arm freestyle.
We don't need to get into that.
So for 2023, is your goal to get back to Kona? And if so,
Yes.
have you thought of a path to get there yet, or any races on the schedule yet?
Yes. So I think my tentative race schedule is going to be, I'm going to go race Clash Miami, which is a race that definitely scares me. I watched that last year and oh man, it was like carnage, right? Like, especially the women's race, like people passing out and like Pamela Oliveira, like running past the finish line. And so I'm like, this is nuts. Why am I going there? I don't do well in the heat, but I love the Clash races. I think they're so much fun. They do treat the pros really well. They're so unique, and Daytona definitely suited me, and Watkins Glen suited me a little bit because they're just, the pavement's like so perfect and they're not super technical or anything. And so I really love those races. They're hard in a different way, but they're super fun. And so I'm going to go do that. And then I'm going to fly from Miami back to Chile and race in Challenge Puerto Varas, which is a race that does suit me. And that's not something I've done many times, race like back-to-back weekends. And so it's kind of a fun challenge for the spring here. And then I think I'm going to do St. Anthony's in St. Petersburg, Florida. And that's another one where I got enough, like, because of the podcast, like I've interviewed a lot of women who say that like St. Anthony's is what got them their start in the sport. And so I'm like, I need to go see what this is all about. And there's like this woman in Bozeman that I used to not swim in the pool at the same time as. She was like 88, Molly Hayes, and she would always go to St. Anthony's and she would swim with this one group that called the Mad Dogs. I think they host a lot of the pros and this big tri group there. And she always talked about how the swim, like 2 days before the race, they would get there and they would howl before the swim. So one of them emailed me and was like, you should come howl with us. And I'm like, okay. So I think I'm going to go do that. And then also probably volunteer at the Meek and Mighty race the day before, which is a super sprint. Again, just, it's one of those patterns that I've noticed in podcasting, that whenever we talk to these people especially from, you know, just different backgrounds than mine, they didn't come from having parents who did sports, how they got into triathlon. And it's the Meek and Mighty at St. Anthony's. So I want to go see it. I'm going to volunteer at the finish line. So hopefully get some training on how to put some medals on, and then race the Olympic distance race the next day, which I haven't done. I know this is not the best. I wouldn't recommend this kind of pre-race for everyone, but I think I am someone who's a little bit energized by doing some of these things. And I'm pretty good at this point at like managing my energy pre-race, and St. Anthony's isn't my A race, but after that one, I think I'm going to probably swap, goals to, or, you know, focus to more Ironman distance and race, Ironman Coeur d'Alene will have a pro race this year, which is the closest I get to like a hometown race. I've raced the half there very well a couple times. I raced the full there in 2021 and it was so hot and I ran really well. I rode like garbage, but I ran really well. I don't know how, but sometimes it just happens. And so I want to go maybe do that one again. And then Tremblant. I'd love to go back to Tremblant. So hopefully between the two of those, I get a Kona slot, because I would really love to be at that all women's Kona. And then, I mean, they just announced the US PTO Open. I don't think those races like suit me quite as well, because I'm a little bit older and just probably not quite in the 100K thing, but I love what the PTO is doing. And occasionally I can pull out some speed. That's in August. We'll see how I'm feeling, if I can squeeze that in there and if I can get in. I don't think I'm guaranteed an entry. And so it's sort of, we'll see how things go. And then I'd also love to go back to Daytona. I think that race is fantastic. I usually have a couple friends who do the sprint race, which is the next day, which is also completely on the track. So if anyone wants a really fun end of season race and pretty good weather and just fun, unique, I think that sprint race in Daytona, I know people poo-poo on kind of these short distance races, but it's so fun. And it's so fun to cheer for, because I can like stand in one spot and be like, go, go, go. Anyway, you get some good photos. I don't know. I think it's a fun race atmosphere and a good way to end the year. So I know that it's all tentative, and hopefully I stay healthy and I'm able to do all of that. But I think it's a good combination of really hard races, things that challenge me, some nostalgia, and then also just kind of meeting up with people and chatting a lot. As you can tell, one of my favorite things to do.
What an epic schedule. We're pumped to follow along on that. Changing up gears a little bit here, I wanted to jump into a little bit about your team and your training. So you've talked about your coach, Matthew, a couple of times. How long have you worked with him? How did that relationship come about? And what kind of works for you guys?
I think Matthew and I's relationship is a little bit unique in the sport, because I think so in like 2008, when I was swimming at the Dynamo pool, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. Dynamo is a pretty big swim club there that's been around for forever. And I swam with the masters team there because my college roommate's brother was like, you should just try this. It's fun. And I was like, I don't want to swim ever again. And then I went, and it was so much fun. It was so much fun. So anyway, I was swimming there, and I would do a lot of backstroke. So I actually went to the US Olympic trials in 2008 because it was like cheaper to swim than to buy tickets. And my old roommate was racing and going to make the Olympic team. And so I was like, okay, I'll do this, which was a great idea until I like got into the ready room. And I was like, what was I thinking? I'm like, I'm going to get last. But honestly, again, when I was in high school, I knew someone who got last at Olympic trials, and I still thought he hung the moon. So I was like, whatever, get last at Olympic trials. There's like worse things in life. And so I was feeling woefully unprepared, but I did it. And so that summer I just did a lot of random stuff, but I would swim a ton of backstroke, like tons of backstroke. And because I was a 200 backstroker, and the guy in the pool laying next to me was like, what is this girl doing? Like, what are you doing? Because it's like masters swimming, and random person doing everything. Every freestyle set I would do backstroke really fast. And so he was like, random guy was starting a triathlon club at Dynamo. And I was like, I want to join, because I was just in joining mode. And I think he was actually a little hesitant to coach me because I was like 23 at the time, and just sort of, I didn't know what I was doing. But again, my friend Betty, who I'd met at Dynamo, the coach there, her name was Maria Thrash, she's passed away since then, but she was just this incredible force and really good at like matching people up as like training partners. And so when I met Betty, I was 22 and she was 44. And she was just getting back into triathlon. And I was like, I know nothing. And so I like kind of like glommed onto her. And she was the person who was like, you shouldn't ride a bike and run shorts. Like, go to REI, go get some bike shorts, and just advice like that. And I was like, okay. And so when Matthew was just starting this tri club, Betty wanted to hire him. And so he was like, I don't know. And I'm like, you know what? I'm either going to pay you to coach me, or I'm just going to do your workouts for free and just do what Betty's doing. Because he's like, you should do some research, which now as a coach, I'm like, yeah, you should do some research. But I was like 23 years old. I don't do research. Like, I'm like, I don't know. It was just one of those things. And it was just luck. Like, I literally just met him that way. And so he started coaching me, I guess, officially in 2009. So we're going on 14 years, which don't tell him that, because I think he would be like, no. But we've definitely grown together during that time. So, I mean, he's coached me from literally like first, races that were like structured. I had dabbled in some triathlons before that, but, didn't really know what I was doing. And so really all the way to winning Ironman and getting 13th in Kona, which I do think is a little bit unique in the triathlon world. And part of that is just Matthew, his sister had swam in the Olympics. And so, he had coached as a volunteer assistant at Stanford, and then he coached as assistant at Emory. So it's not like he didn't know anything. It wasn't like Joe Schmo. He definitely, especially when I was young, like spoke my language, like the swimming language, and could kind of help put running and cycling terms into swimming terms so that I understood them, and which just really helped me. And then I think that having him in person for some of those early years was really, really helpful. But then by the time I moved away, it was fine. Like our relationship had grown enough that I didn't need anyone to see me. Like I know enough that I can like alter stuff if needed. And I don't need someone to tell me, go run on this exact hill. You know, I can find a hill that works. And so I'm really lucky that we've grown together in that way. And I think he's grown as a coach. You know, I was his third athlete ever. And now he's, you know, built a program, and then basically he stepped away and he's not the head coach of Dynamo anymore, but he kind of is a head coach emeritus and coaches a lot of other, just not a lot of people. It's probably a pretty small roster. And, but I'm still affiliated with Dynamo in that way. And it's why I wear green and yellow, because that's where I got my start. And I'm thankful he's still coaching. You know, he has 3 kids and they've gotten older and busier. And I do think he gets me, and we have a really good relationship. Although probably at this point, it's a lot more collaboration than it was in the past. Like, you know, I offer a lot of feedback, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. No, I really appreciate Matthew. And I know sometimes I'm a, you know, pain in the butt, but he handles it pretty well. So it's been good. And it's been fun. He's worked with some other pro women. He's a pretty low key guy. Like, I don't really think he's on social media anymore. And definitely like isn't trying to build like a coaching empire. I think he's kind of at a point in his life where he's like, coaches people who interest him. And luckily somehow I've managed to stay on that roster. And, but right now, Grace Alexander, who's kind of an up and coming pro, he's coaching her, and that's kind of fun for me to watch and learn. And I'm just like, it's fun because we're at such different points in our careers. And I am really excited for Grace. And I think she's going to, you know, do some really good things. And it's fun too, because you know, the day that Grace won Augusta 70.3, I told her this on when I interviewed her, but I was on Mount Lemmon in Tucson training for Kona, and I was, you know, trying to get service and getting a couple text messages. And then I saw that she won right as I was like about to start my intervals. And there's some power in that, in knowing that someone who, you know, we're not in the same coaching training plan at all. Like I was training for Kona, she's training for 70.3 and that kind of thing. But okay, like this is working, obviously. So if she just crushed this, like I can crush my session too. And I get a little bit of oomph from that. And I think it goes back to my college swimming days, watching your teammates do well. And you're like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. So that was fun. You know, she inspires me, even though she's like, Matthew once said like he started coaching me before Grace was born. But I don't think that's really true, but it feels that way.
Oh, that's hilarious. So I'm sure your trainings with Matthew has like changed a bunch over the last number of years, and you've, I'm sure, found a recipe that works for you, given that you're still winning races right now. What are some of the key things for training itself and kind of around training that you really focus on to allow you to continue to perform at your best?
Yeah, I think it definitely has changed as I've gotten older. I mean, I've been a pro for 10 years now. And so I get more tired now. So I have to like pay attention to that. And I think I'm a little bit kinder to myself now. I think because I am like, okay, this is amazing. You're still doing this. And so if I miss intervals, which does happen, you know, I'm like, okay, whatever, it's one day, move on. And that was something I actually learned from Sarah True. There was I trained with Sarah True in 2016 a little bit when I was her. I was in a boot and I was swimming with her, and Matthew was actually, helping her a bit with her swimming heading into the Rio Olympics. And I watched Sarah have this day that was like, she just had a bad day swimming, you know, and she's swimming next to me and I was like crushing it. And, you know, when she got out, she's like, okay, the effort was there, but the times weren't, and like moved on with her life. And I was like, wow, I mean, this shouldn't be revolutionary, but I was like, that is great. Cause I think in the past I would have been like all day, that day, all day, the next day, all day, the next day, you know, probably for like 2 weeks or months or years being like that bad swim, you know? And it was like, no, you can just be like, the effort was there. And even if the times weren't, and then move on and hopefully, you know, get some good food in you, get a nap, get, or whatever you can, get to bed early and try again the next day. And so I try to remind myself of that when I have those hard sessions. So I'd say, I mean, I don't think I'm doing less now as, that I'm older. Like when I was training for Ironman, it was like, oh my gosh, but I know that I have a bigger base. And so I don't feel as much like I need to do 6-hour aerobic rides. I honestly probably do a lot more 6-hour rides with intervals, which are horrific, but I know it's like a certain time period. It's not forever. And I just sort of like, I'm like, okay, do this, make sure you're eating enough, get it done. And then, get on recovery. And so it's probably a lot more specific, a lot more like actually probably more intensity, maybe a little bit less total volume, especially running. I think that my run has actually come along well as I've gotten older, which is bizarre. But I think that's just been consistent training and just not getting injured. But I think that I probably run less than some other people and probably less than people think, but I do some really intense like tempo sessions that I would not have been able to do, 10 years ago. There's no way I could have done them 10 years ago, but now I can handle that. But it's just taken a long time. And I just think that consistency without injury is probably it's the easiest thing to say, but the hardest thing to actually do. And I think that my career is kind of a testament that does pay off.
Yeah, so cool. So many great take homes for people on that. I can definitely see
I hope
you
so.
having...
I feel like I get like a little bit like all over the place. I'm like, okay, Haley, bullet point this.
No, that was great. I could tell you had your coaching hat on from that one. I love it. So just kind of finishing off a little bit on the training talk. I know you've been with a number of some of your sponsors and companies for a number of years. Who are some of those companies that you work with, and kind of why do you work with them, and how do they help your performance?
Yeah. So Quintana Roo, which I mentioned earlier for bikes, I've been with them for a long time. Probably like my second or third pro year. So, probably going up on like 8-9 years now. And a lot of that stemmed from starting in Atlanta, and they were in Chattanooga. So it's like kind of a geographical proximity. And it just felt really good to kind of work with a sort of local company. And since then, it's great. It's a family owned company. I get to chat with the CEO sometimes, which is like pretty cool. And they also make a great bike, and will paint it green and yellow for me, which is fun. So I get more cheers. And then this year I actually have a new sponsor, Mock Apparel, which is, it's kind of, that's a wild one for me. It's different, but there's a connection with Bozeman as well, which I love the geographical connections. And a lot of the ambassadors are here. And then we are hopefully doing a very bright kit for this year. So I will, because that's one of the things I said. I was like, no one recognizes me. Oh, it's so good. I should show you a picture, but I hope, I'm crossing my fingers. I have it by Miami. I will say, I think I could say this. So I was very inspired by, there was I don't know if it was a paparazzi shot or if it was like they released it, but the upcoming Barbie movie that's coming out this summer.
Oh my gosh.
Margot Robbie and you know what picture I'm talking about,
yes,
right? Of them in
yes.
like their roller skating or rollerblading outfits. So that was my inspiration. It's like a gore, it's a dynamo take on that. So it's like green and yellow, but hopefully
triathlon Barbie core. I love it.
I'm going for. So hopefully it comes together like that. But I know I'm like throwing stuff out there, but maybe I'm like manifesting it to the universe. Like I want it for Miami, but we'll see, apparel stuff and shipping and all of that. We all know it's hard. So hopefully that will come together. And then, I mean, Dynamo, I consider like a true part of my, why I'm in triathlon. I think that if I hadn't, managed to get on that Dynamo deck, I don't know if I would be a triathlete, not in this capacity. And so I do coach with Dynamo Multisport, which is, that again, that financial stability stuff that I talk about, like makes your pro life a lot easier. I'm thankful that I have athletes that I get to coach with, and, they're kind of my coworkers in a way. And I coach a pretty wide variety of ages and abilities and goals. And that's been really fun over the years. It's one of those things that I didn't necessarily expect to enjoy, but now it's taken me a while to like find my rhythm and get confident, I think, in coaching. And I think I'm finally there. And I'm seeing, I had 2 athletes race in Kona last year, which was really cool to like see them on the course. And then 2 qualified to race in 2023 already. So hopefully we'll have a nice little group there, but it's been fun. But it's all like, sometimes it is just watching someone do their first sprint. I get just as jazzed for that. So that's like a big part of it. And then I am thankful for the PTO. In all honesty, I think that what they're doing is very good for the sport. And I'm excited to hear how that grows, over the next couple years. But I got to go to the Collins Cup a couple years ago, and it was very impressive as an alternate. And I didn't, attend any of the opens last year, but I watched them. I think the coverage is great. I think the financial support that they're offering athletes is incredible. I snuck in as number 50. So I was like, woohoo, I got to do something fun with this money, which I have some plans for. So we'll see what happens. I'm like, it's going to be a good year, I think, but I am thankful for that kind of support. And I think it's going to make this sport better. I think in the long term, it's going to take a little bit of time. And, but if there's someone like me, who's like 50th and can manage, to do something a little bit different this year and have a little bit of that stress not there, I think that we're going to see better performances. And that's ultimately, what we want.
Something that is so evident about you is your love for community and people. And like, right when you were describing your first years in triathlon, I've seen it in, the many years that you've been with Smash Fest and even what you're bringing to coaching. But I'd love to hear about what Smash Fest has brought to you and the part in your life that plays.
Yeah. So Smash Fest Queen was my apparel sponsor for, I think, 9 years, which is a really long time. And that was very, a really good relationship. And I talk about that first race in Brazil. And I think that was when Hillary had just started the company, and Hillary had, been a good friend through Matthew, actually my coach. So I think it was actually after my first Kona, when I went 12 and a half hours in 2009, I talked to Hillary on the phone, and we talked about going pro, which is like, if you're a 12 and a half hour Ironman person, you're probably not usually thinking about going pro, but she was actually the one who told me, like, start saving money now. And that was really good advice. And so when she started Smash Fest Queen, I think in 2013, 2012, 2013, she was just wearing it. And, I just admired Hillary as a business person. And so then I think the following year they were looking to bring on some pros to support, and I was luckily one of those pros. And I think that I did, really appreciate her support as someone who had been in my position not that long before. I mean, she was still kind of racing my first years, but was transitioning out. And she and Michelle Landry just built that company up really, well. And they entertained making a green and yellow kit. And I was like, I can sell it. And they're like, really? And I was like, yeah. And then I think it did work. And they do make kits that stand out on the course. And I'm really thankful for their support. And then they built up Team SFQ, which is fun to have that, like you said, the community when you think you're going to a race by yourself, and then you find out you're not. And there's a group of people who are very similar to you and excited and maybe wearing very bright colored spandex. And I do remember this one time, like, it's the funniest thing when you see someone wearing your kit and like, they didn't have any clue who I was. Like, I was at a race once and I was like, oh, you're wearing my kit. And the woman's like, who are you? Please get away from me. But that's great. I mean, that's cool. So people like, it's like people like green and yellow, they don't like me, but it's just, it was really fun. And I was very thankful for their professionalism and their support through all those years. And parting ways was very emotional. It definitely was emotional, but the industry has changed, the sport has changed, and we're all just trying to kind of weather that and try to find our place in the sport. And I think that it was just something that business wise had to happen. So I will always be grateful for the support and cheers that I've had from them for over the years. And I will always be cheering for people in Smash Fest Queen for sure, because I still have a lot of friends who are on the team, and I'm still a fan, and definitely still thankful for Hillary and Michelle.
Well, you're such a cheerleader in the sport in so many ways, and it's so neat to watch you build out your athletes. And I'd love to have you describe, like, if you had to describe yourself as a coach, what would you say?
Oh God, I think I'm terrible. No, I don't think I'm terrible. I think I've
Okay,
had
you're
some-
not doing your own marketing.
No, I don't think I'm terrible. I think I'm good. I do think I'm a good coach. I think I'm a good coach for certain types of people, not for everyone in the world. That is for sure. And I try to make that pretty clear when I like bring on, and get inquiries from new athletes that I am still racing. Like, so I don't have a huge roster. I don't travel to races. I'm not going to have camps. I'm just not at that point in my life. So I think my athletes are usually the type of people who are fairly like self-sufficient and self-motivated, because that's the other thing. I am a little bit more of a cheerleader. I'm not someone who's going to be like, you missed that, like, why in the world did you miss that run? I only coach adults. So I just always assume, like, if someone has missed a workout, it was a good reason. Everyone wants to be doing this. No one has to. And so I kind of come at it from that perspective. So I think I'm a good coach for those type of people. But I do think bizarrely, I work really well with people with non-traditional schedules. I very early on, one of my earliest athletes, who's still one of my athletes, she's an ER doctor. And I kind of learned a lot from that. Just that, it's what is the, if someone is working an overnight shift, even people who are really good at it, because some people are just really good at not sleeping. But it still has a toll. And so kind of recognizing that whole stress is stress, like whether it's coming from work, whether it's coming from, training, from, just random, your microwave doesn't work kind of thing. Like there's like always going to be these things. And I think I've over the years have gotten better at anticipating that. So I actually worked with quite a few people who have non-traditional schedules, and knowing that we're not always working on a 7-day, plan, and that not every long ride is going to be on a Saturday or Sunday. And I also think that me having a lot of indoor training experience, both on the treadmill and on the trainer, has helped me with age groupers, just because every age grouper I know is incredibly busy. And so you really want to have workouts be as efficient as possible. So we're doing as much as they possibly can, but in, just understanding that they have really, really busy lives. And so now, like, smart trainers make things so much easier than, back in the day when you're just trying to like go off heart rate or something. And so I think that I'm pretty good about that. And I do think that me still racing can be a downside in some respect, because sometimes I'm like, I'm on a plane and I'm not available all the time. But I think in another respect, I think it's good, because I am always getting that reminder of what it feels like to do an Ironman, what it feels like to be out there, and understand that sometimes it's not that we're trying to like not slow down. We're trying to not stop, we're trying to keep ourselves moving and having that grace that things go wrong. And how do you handle that? And it's like, I think that there is some value in that. I do think, in the future, I would like to continue coaching even past my pro racing. And so I think, then it's like, I might be able to run more camps and be at more races, which I think I would really enjoy. I do love being at races. It's just it's hard. It's like very hard. So it's always like managing that energy. And I can see where that, some people really want a coach who's going to be at the races. And right now I'm not that person, but maybe someday. So I'm evolving as well.
Well, one of the ways that you continue to give back is the Ironman or the Iron Women podcast. I'd love to hear about how you got started into that and sort of your why behind it.
Yeah. So it started like Sarah Gross and Alyssa Godesky, I think, actually started it. So Sarah Gross, who was initially one of my competitors, kind of retired from triathlon, started Feisty Media. I think they were initially hosting it on a different platform. And then Sarah was like, why don't I do my own? And then around that time is when they brought me on. I think I was a guest and chatted enough that they were like, oh, she could just host this. So I joined Alyssa, and and it was, it has grown and evolved throughout the years as well. And I think, we've had some, ups and downs, but for the most part, in the beginning, I would get, real nervous and all this, but then I think I did a good job of listening to the podcast with kind of an, not necessarily like critical of myself, but then not necessarily like, oh, you did a terrible job. It's like, okay, you could have answered that question a little bit better. I don't know if you all listen back to yourself. It's a lot of people don't like it, but I don't mind it. I'm just like, I think I'm able, again, to be kind to myself and just try to think of it as oh, how could you do this better? And same thing with getting guests. I think it's like, I'm going to challenge myself. I think Pamela Oliveira, who I mentioned earlier, that was one I was really proud of because she's from Brazil, and having a non-English speaker on the podcast, I mean, that is something I'm like, we haven't really done much. And it was hard because we hired a translator and made it, I think so it kind of worked, but it was hard and different and challenging. And that's something I wouldn't have done in the early years, but now will do when my brain capacity is good. I definitely don't do that every single week, but trying to kind of expand a little bit. I think initially we started, it was like pros talking to each other. And now it's kind of expanded into more of like the endurance sport community. And the initial mission that I kind of told myself, like, why am I doing this? It was to bring more media attention to women in endurance sport, because I felt like even me, I was like, I have some good stories. Why doesn't anyone interview me? And I'm like, okay, fine. I just got to do it myself. And it's like, okay, if I have this feeling, probably a lot of other women do. And there are days when I'm like, okay, do we still need that? Like, now with social media and with everyone, there's a lot of outlets. I'm like, do we still need that? And based on the number of women we still have who will be their first podcast or one of their first interviews, I think that, yes, we probably still do need it, because I'm always shocked. Like, we are someone's first podcast or first interview quite frequently. And I know that we'll have people who are nervous, they're real nervous to come on. And it is one of those things, like, I'm like, how do you think you get better? It's like, you got to practice, and it also kind of has to be real. Like, it's going to go out into the world. And then people who make, they'll be like, oh, could you edit this part out? I'm like, I can, but also it's not as bad as you think. I'm like, I don't know. We don't talk about anything too controversial on Iron Women, but it has been really good. And I know that y'all's podcast is relatively new, but in the beginning, it's like, is anyone listening? Like, is my mom listening, or is she not? She doesn't even listen. It's like, you don't know. And until you go to races sometimes, and people will be like, oh, I heard your podcast. And I'm like, what? You're like, oh my goodness, people are listening and you don't even know me. It's like seeing your kid in the wild. It's, hearing that someone does listen. And that's been really, really nice as well. And so there's, I've learned a lot, and I've gotten a lot out of the podcast that I didn't expect. And it is a lot of work. I mean, you all know, you got to edit this whole interview. Good luck.
No, it is a lot of work, but your comment earlier about like, is there, with all social media, is there still a place for it? I listen to your podcast, so
oh, thank you.
Excited to have you here. But I think that there's always a place, especially where you talk about it's their very first podcast. It's that whole idea of recognizing, because with social media, so often these female triathletes need to be the one that are telling their stories themselves. And not everyone feels comfortable with that. So for you to be able to unlock those stories, you make people feel comfortable, and you give a platform to shine the stories. I just think it's such a tremendous thing that you're doing for women in not just triathlon, but endurance sports. I know that they have a vertical with, gravel riding, and Feisty Media is looking at menopause. It's just looking at all the different elements that make it up. And I know you have a wide ranging podcast, like interviews. You're in the hundreds, right? I think there's always going to be a place for it, right?
Thank you. Yeah, I think so too. And one of the best comments I ever got back was, we interviewed someone who was her first podcast, and afterward, and it was rocky, it was a little rocky. And then she actually wrote, like, a couple weeks later, she was like, I did terrible on your podcast, but she's like, you know what? I did another one the next week and I did awesome. And I was like, amazing. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. I'm like, yep, come on us, like have it a little rocky. And now it's like no big deal. And so, I mean, cause I've been there, I've done plenty of interviews where I was like, whew, what was I doing? I'm like, goodness, we should have just done that at the bar.
Well, maybe add alcohol for a little bit of fun. Who knows?
Oh, it'd be too much fun.
With hundreds of podcast episodes that you've done, is there any common themes that you're getting through these, whether, you're talking to pros, you're talking to athletes where it's their first interview? Is there anything that is like consistent takeaway that keeps bubbling up?
I think one of the most consistent is just how hard it is. I think that it's whether it's your first pro race or, or amateur race or, you've been doing it for 10 years, it's really hard. And I think that we're all very much like questioning, what are we doing? I don't think that's like a uncommon thought, and, kind of always trying to figure out like our place in the sport. And I do think that's part of it, is just triathlon's new and it's growing. And I think that we're, a lot of the fears that I have are not unique. I think maybe that's like the thing where I'm like, oh no, I'm going to like get last. Oh no, I'm going to make a fool of myself on this podcast. I don't know. I think, or maybe everyone noticed that I had a bad race, and it's like, no one noticed. Like, I think that's like, those are like the things that I actually recognize. Cause sometimes people will be like, oh no, they're going to ask about, something like that. And I'm like, I didn't see it as bad. And I'm, a coach and a competitor and a fan of the sport. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And then I can throw that on myself too. So when I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed, everyone saw that I got 18th at the world championship. And then I'm like, Haley, come on. Like, no one is like, or 19th, or I don't even know. Again, I should know what place, but, no one else sees that as bad. And so I think that there's certain things like that. I think that another theme when we interview, we do interview mostly pros, but some, non-pros. And that was like, how do they get into the sport? And I do think some of these like really short races with like pool swims is like a pattern that I've seen. And it's just like, so I'm like huge fan of those. And then also relays. I'm a huge fan of relays, because I'm like, I think that how are we going to grow triathlon? And I think it is like making it that first initial leap into the sport a little bit easier. So relays, I think, pool swim, short races, and, and also like short races are awesome. Like, I think, I'm guilty of it. You hear me talk about Kona. I love Kona. I love it. But, I also can take a step back and be like, okay, it isn't for everyone, and it isn't the be all end all. And there's still really cool ways to be a triathlete without going super long and without going to Kona. And I think that that's been a fun thing for me to learn and kind of see throughout the sport as well.
And you've enjoyed like over a decade in the sport. I'd love to know, I would imagine at the beginning of your career, there was even more barriers than exist for women today. And you've played such a huge role in exposing them and giving a platform. And you said you're such a cheerleader. What barriers do you still see for women in triathlon?
Yeah. So I think it's taken me a long time to get this way. Like, I definitely wasn't on the forefront of, gender equality in the beginning. And so I'm proud of myself for kind of learning and recognizing and being like, oh no, I am part of the problem. I got to do something. And so I think that, maybe that's it too. Like, there's still a lot of people like, 25-year-old me who are like, it's fine. I'm here. And it's like, wait, no, cause I'm like incredibly, like, I'm not a normal person. And so you want to make it accessible for people who are different than me. And so I think that there's that, which is just cultural. And then I think that we have to look at every part of the sport. And so it is the racing, and it is also commentating, it's photographers, it's, race officials, probably it's coaches. And I think that things are getting better, but I think that making sure that it's on, every level, is good. And I do think I'm a huge fan of getting more women in Kona and at the World Championship. And I know that, you know, I've heard it from some of the best meaning people that they're like, it'll be too easy. And I'm like, have you done an Ironman? I've done like 20 some, and I'm like, I've never finished one and was like, that was so easy. You know, I'm like, it's not a 100-meter dash, which isn't easy either, but like different. I think that I again have been guilty in the past of thinking things needed to be super elite and all this. And I realized that I was just like the elitist a-hole who wanted to feel special. And that was like my own problem, you know, and I needed to figure that one out. But I'm like, there's always a way to make it harder. I'm like, win your age group, get on the podium, like go pro, go beat Chelsea. Like you can always make it harder. I'm like, there's no way to I have so much respect for everyone who finishes and starts an Ironman because it's so scary. It's so scary to get on that start line. And so I have so much respect for that. And I think that barrier is one that we're going to overcome in the next couple of years, because the thing is, when you have a bigger pool of people and then they're not doing like 4 Ironmans to try to get there, people are going to be faster. And so it's going to be like, I think the whole level is going to like level up and everything's going to be a lot faster. And you know, in 4 years, it's going to be really hard still to qualify and be a part of it, but we're going to get more people from more communities there, which then they go back to, you know, their small town and get to strut around on the pool deck with their Ironman cap and tattoos and all that kind of stuff and feel cool, hopefully.
No, it's the equality is so important, and it's exciting to look at the future of women in triathlon. I think that, I mean, we're just getting started. Like you said, it's such a new sport. It's so cool to see the opportunity that's ahead. Before we end, I'm noticing the bookshelf in the background. We've talked a lot about how you are always building community, and one of my majors was English literature. So I have to ask about your book club. How did that start? What are you reading right now? And how do you choose your books?
Okay. Well, yes, I have a little bit of a book club. We started, I think, during the pandemic. So one of my good friends, Shelly, who I do actually coach, she's about to run her first marathon in a couple weeks. But she's a swim friend initially. I think the two of us were like, she's a voracious reader, right? Like she can read a book in like 10 minutes and I'm so slow. Like I'm really slow, but I love reading. And I think that it is one of those things where when my mental health is at its best, I'm usually reading a book or two. And so it's something I like do try to work on. And so we were like, okay, let's just like start a casual book club, because it was like during the pandemic and I was very lonely. And so it was just like a way to connect with people. And we usually, and then we've added our friend Megan since then, who's also a runner I coach, and who also reads quite a bit. And so I'm like the dud in the group, but I'm the one who like posts the most on social media. So it like makes me look like I probably do more, but they usually pick the books. Occasionally I pick the books. I'm terrible sometimes at picking books, but occasionally I pick good ones. But we just finished for January, we read Ann Patchett's These Precious Days, which if you haven't read that,
I have not.
It was like one of the most beautiful books. I like didn't want it to end. It's essays and it's a memoir. And I had read The Dutch House by Ann Patchett before, and it was which was beautiful. I think it was a finalist for the Pulitzer. And These Precious Days does talk about, about writing The Dutch House and what are the main stories. You don't have to have read that book to read These Precious Days. But the backstory is so cool. But some of these books I was like laughing, I was crying. I want to be best friends with Ann Patchett, which I know is like a weird parasocial relationship, but it happens. Megan and I are going to Taylor Swift. So I should have put this on my race roster or my race plans. In May, we're going to go see Taylor Swift in Nashville, which I'm
amazing.
Like, oh, we won the lottery with these. It was very painful getting these tickets, very painful. I don't need to go into that, but we got tickets, and then Ann Patchett has a bookstore in Nashville. And so like, we're so excited. Yeah. Like our whole trip is planned on like going to this bookstore. Like what books are we going to buy? Is Ann going to be there? Probably not, but like maybe, we're like, trying to figure out, does Anne go for runs? You know, all this. It's so creepy. It's so bad. But I just like, we love her, and then we love Taylor Swift. So it's kind of a weird little weekend. But yeah, that's a book I would highly, highly recommend that one. We haven't picked February yet, so I'm gonna have to like stay tuned on that one. But I was proud of I read like These Precious Days in like, I want to say under a week, and I was like savoring it. Like I was like making myself stop and like just like reflect on some of these essays because they were like so beautiful. So definitely recommend that one. And I'm nervous. I don't know if I'm supposed to pick the next one or if someone else is picking it, but I think it's going to be hard to follow that one up. Like, I'm like, please, someone else pick it. Cause I don't want to be the one who picks the like boring book after that. No, it's fine. I mean, someone told me once that, and I don't know if you feel this way, like as an English, someone who knows a lot about English, but you know, reading something is good for you no matter what it is. And one of my smartest friends in college read so many romance novels, and she's brilliant, and she got like, you know, perfect scores on her SATs and stuff. And so I do believe that. I'm like, as long as you're reading something, and I do like reading physical books, and I love owning it. My dad is always like, you have too many books. And I was like, not possible. So okay, thank you. I'll tell him. Jess said it was fine.
Yeah. And I had a conversation earlier today where someone's like, buying books and reading books are two separate sports. So like, I don't know if you're guilty of buying them and not reading them. My challenge to myself is to read all of the books on my shelf, and I'm going to add that one. So please don't stop sharing your books, because I actually do take your recommendations. It's like, oh, that's her book club, I'm going to read the book.
Thanks. I know it's a very casual book club. I think we had a Goodreads page. We're like, oh, we'll like start like threads, and like no one, it's hard. Everyone's busy. So it's very, very casual. Like it's one of those things, like I probably should like, I don't know, figure out an Instagram way to do it. But yes, no, I can see the buying books and not reading them, but I also think it's like, I mean, if you've read every single book that's on your shelves, I mean, I've read most of those, but I feel like some of them I haven't, and that's fun because some days I'm just like, oh, I have an extra 30 minutes. Like, let's sit down and read. But I also think there are worse habits, you know, like than buying books. Like I could be buying much worse things. I won't say those on the podcast.
Well, exactly. And I know we're pulling like on a few threads that are like the non-sport version of you, but we got in trouble in another podcast. So we do know some people do listen to this, where we didn't ask about the dog. So I want to hear a little bit about Cowboy before we wrap this up, because this does matter to the people who listen. So tell us about how you got Cowboy and a little bit about who he is.
Yeah, if I don't post about Cowboy, people are like, where is he? And yeah, Cowboy is, well, he's technically like my parents' Australian Shepherd that I dog sat once and never gave back. And so he's like the sweetest. He's 7.5 years old now, which shocks me, but he's just like my best friend basically. And we do occasionally run together. But yesterday I was like, do you want to go for a run? And he like curls up in a, you know, ball in the bed, and I'm like, okay, I guess not, you know. So he sets good boundaries, but no, he's just like a really big personality, very sweet dog. He's actually like trained very well on podcasting. I will say he's like real quiet, like sleeps on my feet, and then the second I say goodbye, he's like pops up and is like, feed me or take me for a walk. He's like, I know you said goodbye. So I will say that's kind of convenient. Like he's used to this.
Which is amazing, because he needs to teach our dog, you know, something. I was sitting here and I have like rips in the knees, and like I'm trying to ask you a question. He's like licking my knees as I'm trying to talk.
Oh no. He's like, it's time to go for a walk.
Yeah, time to feed me.
Do you run with your dog?
Yes. So he's a golden
nice.
Retriever. So he is not necessarily bred for running, but I think he's almost gotten up to a half marathon. He's getting
nice. Like 16K, 10 miles or something with him.
We do need to watch though, because like I might take him on a run in the morning and Mark will take him in the afternoon. So he does do double run days, but we always need to check in. How long did you run with him today, so we don't overrun him?
I'm his coach as well, so I got to keep him on the nice mileage plan.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how some dogs are like that. They'll just like keep going. Cowboy's not like that. Like he will just lay down, and then he's like, carry me home. And I'm like, you're 50 pounds. No. And then I just have to make sure I carry a bunch of treats. He's a very food motivated dog. But yeah, and if it's like cold or whatever, he likes the snow, but only to a certain level. But he loves a good walk. Again, I think it might be being 7.5, and he's kind of a chill guy anyway, but yeah, it is, nothing's better than a tired dog. So if you can get your run in and bring your friend, it's like, it works out well.
Well, thank you for enlightening us about Cowboy. I know that people will appreciate that we had that moment.
Oh, good.
I would love to wrap by talking about your legacy. What do you want to leave when you you talked a lot about, you're going to return to accounting at 80, but between now and then, what do you want to accomplish and leave the world of triathlon?
I mean, I think I'm not under any illusion that like, I probably am not going to be known as like the fastest ever, but I think that I'm someone who is a little bit more relatable. Like I've done well with what I have. And I think that I show that there isn't just, one path. I think that you can live in a place that isn't known for triathlon and still do well. You can have a background that isn't perfect for triathlon. You can, not do a bunch of lactate tests all the time and still do okay. And, just those kind of things. Like, I think we get a little caught up in perfection, and I'm like, okay, no, actually, like doing most of the big things right, it can actually get you there. You can come back from having bad years and do better. And then I hope people think of me as being kind. Again, that's something I've worked on. And I think most of my biggest regrets in life are like, oh, I should have been nicer in that moment. And so it is something I'm working on. It doesn't come supernatural all the time, but I try really hard, and, and just try to leave the sport a little bit better than before I got here, And so I think if that's my legacy and only like 10 people remember it, like, that'd be great.
Well, I think a few more than 10 people will remember it, because you're here because you're our endurance icon, but I'd love to know who's yours.
Endurance icon. So this might be a little like out of the realm, but of triathlon, but honestly, like the last, like, I guess several months, like I've been very, like, it has been like, what, like, who do I admire? And one of the people I think that really has come up is Hillary Nelson, who is the mountaineer who passed away last year on an expedition, I think Manaslu. So she was climbing, there was an avalanche, and she died. And I had actually gotten to see her speak here in Bozeman a few years ago. They have Ice Fest, like a big ice climbing fest, and she came and spoke, and it was so cool. And I give some of my skier friends credit for getting me there, because I don't think I would have normally gone. And it was just so cool. She talked about the expedition she had led as a woman. I think she was the first woman to lead like a North Face expedition. I think they climbed Everest and Lhotse within 24 hours, and maybe were the first people to ski Lhotse. And it was just so cool from like an endurance sport perspective. And afterwards we saw her, like she was staying with like a local mountaineering legend, and we saw them like standing outside, and one of my friends was like, you should go talk to her and ask her to come on your podcast. And I was like, oh, I'm too embarrassed. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the courage. And I regret that moment. Like, I regret it so much, because it would have been cool. And then what I did do was, like, afterwards went home, stalked her on Instagram, found out she had done an Ironman. Like, I had a connection, to like, we can kind of work it into Iron Women, that kind of way. And so it was someone I had like, I'm sure you have a list of like a bunch of people like you'd love to. And she was someone I had on the list, but like did not ever reach out to. I never had the courage to do that. And I wish I had. And I think when she passed away, and it hit me harder than I probably should have, someone I've never met, as someone I had just seen speak once, and someone who I don't really have a lot in common with, because I don't ski anymore and I don't climb big mountains, but I just admired her so much, and still do. I admire what she did and the risk she took, and just like the way she lived life. And I think that when I've had hard moments in races since then, when I was kind of really nervous about going to Kona, and I'm like, what am I doing? And like, it's going to hurt so bad. It's going to be so hard. And I think about like, I want to be like someone like Hillary. And I know that that's totally different to like go be incredibly cold on Everest versus being incredibly hot in Hawaii. And my event's only one day, but it's the same kind of mentality. And I think that my recent races, when I've had good races, I have been thinking about that. I was like, okay, I'm really hurting right now. I want to just quit. Like, what would someone who I really admire do in this moment? And I'm like, they would keep going, you know, and then if things didn't go that way, they would, you know, I like mountain expeditions, they don't make the summit, you know, things don't go that way. And they are like, okay, whatever, you know, let's go get more money and try again. And so I think that there's things I can learn from that respect. And I do think about her a lot, which again, probably a little odd, but I think that that's someone who really does have an incredible legacy. And you saw it with her passing away. I mean, she's in the New York Times. Like it's not just me.
No, that's tremendous. And it one of the things, like, we interview so many more sports than triathlon. So the crossover is perfect. And it's the reason that we didn't just choose triathlon is you can get your inspiration from any sport. So I love that. And this has been such a privilege to be able to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Like what an awesome conversation to be able to have with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope, what races are y'all going to be at? Am I going to see you in person?
Well, we're doing Finland.
Okay.
I'll see you in Kona.
Okay.
We're doing Mont Tremblant 70.3 so I don't think we'll see you there.
I don't know if that's the same weekend as Coeur d'Alene. I've never done the 70.3 there, but I'm like,
so fun.
Every time I do that full, I'm like, this would be a really fun 70.3. Okay, so we might not, well, hopefully I see you in Hawaii. If I can get myself qualified there, maybe we'll have to do like a little crossover Iron Women endurance icons.
Wow, how great was that? I always learn so much from these endurance icons. If you enjoyed the podcast as well, please consider liking us across social media, subscribing to us on YouTube, or giving us a 5-star rating on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We appreciate you and your support so much. We wish you happy training, and we'll see you back next week.